So my apologies for not doing this for about a year. We're back in the lovely Burgundy of winter. So here's chapter 13. Please forgive me for the delay between the sound and the video. Fix that. I'm going live on my computer because it's just the easiest way and the fastest way to upload. So anyway, here we go. Here's the little preamble to the chapter that just sort of gives you blow by blow what's going to happen in this chapter. How I set to work to undo a wrong that had been done in the kingdom of the Micamenkes, and how Bulger helped. Queen Galaxa's confession. I am created prime minister as long as she lives. What took place in the throne room. My speech to the men of Goggleland, after which I showed them something worth seeing. How I was pulled in 2 different directions and what came of it. The first thing I did after the genuine princess Crystallina had left me was to seek out Dr. Nebulosus and learn from him the exact number of hours before the queen's heart would run down. As he had just been making an examination, he was able to tell the very minute. It was 17 hours and 13 minutes, rather a short time, you must confess, dear friends, in which to accomplish such an important piece of business I had in mind. I then made my way directly to the royal palace and demanded a private audience with the crystal throne. Was I doing an Irish accent before? I think I'm going to do some kind of mangled accent because it's more fun. With the advice of Sir Amber O'Pake and the Lord Cornucore, she firmly but graciously refused to receive me, giving as an excuse that the excitement that would be sure to follow an interview with the man of coal, so the Micamenkes had named me, would shorten her life at least 13 minutes, but I was not to be put off in so unceremonious a manner. Sitting down, I seized a pen and wrote the following words upon a piece of glazed silk. To Galaxa, queen of the Micamenkes, lady of the crystal throne, I, Lord Bulger, a Micamenkian noble bearer of this, who was the first to discover that the real princess was not sitting on the steps of the crystal throne, demand an audience for my master Baron Sebastian von Trump, commonly known as the Little Baron Trump, and prompted by him I ask, what are 13 minutes of the life, O Queen Galaxa, to the long years of sorrow and disappointment in store for thy royal child? Taking this letter in his mouth, Bulger sprang away with long and rapid bounds. In a few minutes he was in the presence of the queen, for the guards had fallen back, affrighted as they saw him draw near with his dark eyes flashing indignation. Raising himself upon his hind feet, he laid the letter in Galaxa's hands. The moment she had read it, she fell into a swoon, and was all stir and commotion in round the palace. And all was stir and commotion in and around the palace. I was hastily summoned, and the audience member cleared of every attendant save Dr. Nebulosus, Sir Amber O'Pake, the Lord Cornucore, Lord Bulger, and me. Send for the Damoiselle Glowstone, commanded the queen, and when she had appeared, to the amazement of all Swing Bulger and me, Galaxa bade her mount the steps of the crystal throne. Then, having embraced her most tenderly, the queen spoke the words, O faithful counselors and wise friends from the upper world, this is the real Princess Crystallina, whom I have for all these years wickedly and wrongfully kept from her high state and royal privileges. She was born with a speck in her heart, and I feared that it would be useless to ask my people to accept her as my successor. Aye, Lady of the Crystal Throne, exclaimed Lord Cornucore, thou hast wisely done. Thy people would never have received her as Princess Crystallina, for being by the laws of our land denied the privilege to look for themselves, they would never have believed that this spot in the princess's heart was but a tiny speck like a single hair crystal in the arm of thy magnificent throne. Therefore, O queen, we counsel thee not to embitter thy last hours by differences with thy loving subjects. My Lord Cornucore, said I with a low bow, I make bold to raise my voice against thine, and I crave permission from Queen Galaxa to parley with your people. Forbid it, royal lady, cried Sir Amber O'Pake savagely, at which Bulger gave a low growl and showed his teeth. So to be opaque is to be less than transparent, and I get that this is not a positive character, Sir Amber O'Pake. Queen Galaxa, I added gravely, a wrong confessed is half redressed. This fair princess, 'tis true, hath a speck in her heart, which ill accords with the name it bestowed upon her by thy people. Bid me master until thy heart runs down, and by the knighthood of all trumps, I promise thee that thou shalt have 3 hours of happiness ere thy royal heart has ceased to beat. Be it so, little baron, exclaimed Galaxa joyfully. I proclaim thee prime minister for the rest of my life. At these words, Balder broke out into a series of glad barks, and raising upon his hind legs, licked the queen's hand in token of his gratitude, while the fair princess looked a love at me that was too deep to put into words. I had now but a few hours to act. The excitement, so Dr. Nebulosus assured me, would shorten the queen's life a full hour. It had always been my custom to carry about with me a small but excellent magnifying glass, a double convex lens, for the purpose of making examinations of minute objects, and also for the reading inscriptions too tiny to be seen with the naked eye. Hastily summoning a skillful metal worker, I instructed him to set lens in a short tube and to enclose that tube with another so that I could lengthen it at my pleasure. Then, having called together as many of the head men in the nation as the throne room would hold, I requested Lord Cornucore to inform them of the confession which Queen Galaxa had made, namely that in reality Damosel Glowstone was Princess Crystallina and Princess Crystallina was Damosel Glowstone. They were stricken speechless by this piece of information, but when the Lord Cornucore went to tell the whole story and to explain to them why the queen had practiced this deception upon them, they broke out into wildest lamentation, rejoicing over and over again in piteous tones. A speck in her heart, a speck in her heart, O dire misfortune, O woeful day. She never can be our princess if she hath a speck in her heart. By this time my arrangements were complete. I had placed the Princess Crystallina just outside the door of the throne room, where she stood concealed behind the thick hangings, and near her I had stationed the Dr. Nebulosus with a large circular mirror of burnished silver in his hand. Calling out in a loud voice for silence, I thus addressed the weeping subjects of Queen Galaxa. O Micaminkis, Queen of Gogoland, transparent folk! I count myself most happy to be among you at this hour, and to be permitted by your gracious queen to raise my voice in defense of the unfortunate princess with the speck in her heart. Being of noble birth and an inhabitant of another world, it was lawful for me to look through the sorrowing princess. And I have done it. Yes, Micaminkis, I have gazed upon her heart. I have seen the speck within it. I gave ear. Men of Gogoland and you shall know how that speck came there, for it is not, as you doubtless think, a coal black spot within her, that fair enclosure, clearer than the columns of Galaxa's throne. Oh no, Micaminkis, 1,000 times no, it is a tiny blemish of reddish hue, a drop of princely blood from the upper world, which I inhabit. And this drop in all these countless centuries has coursed through the veins of 1,000 kings, and is still kept its roseate glow, still remembered the glorious sunshine which called it into being. And now, men of Gogoland, lest you think that I, for some dark purpose of mine own, I speak of other than the pure and sober truth, behold, I show you the fair Crystallina's heart in its very life and being, as it is, beating and throbbing with hope and fear commingled. Look and judge for yourselves. And with this I signaled to those on the outside of the palace to carry out my instructions. In an instant, the thick curtains were drawn, and the throne room was wrapped in darkness, and at the same moment Dr. Nebulosus, with his mirror, caught the strong white rays of light and threw them upon Crystallina's body, while I, through an opening in the hanging, made haste to apply the tube, Illuminax, to which the lens had been fitted, and catching the reflected image of her heart, threw it up in plain and startling view upon the opposite wall of the throne room. Upon seeing how small the speck was, and how truthfully I had described it, the Micaminkis fell a weeping for purest joy, and then, as if one voice, they burst out, Long live the fair Princess Crystallina with the ruby speck in her heart, and 10,000 blessings on the head of little Baron Trump and Lord Bulger for swinging our land from cruel dissensions. I, the people on the outside, took up the cry, and in a few moments the whole city was thronged with bands of Queen Galaxa's subjects, singing and dancing and telling of their love for the fair princess with a ruby speck in her heart. I had kept my word. Queen Galaxa would have at least 3 hours of complete happiness ere her heart ran down. But suddenly, the river of light began to flicker and dim its flood of brilliant white rays. Night was coming, noiselessly, as if by magic. The Minkaminkies faded from sight, stealing away in search of beds. And as the gloom crept into the great throne room, someone plucked me gently by the hand, and a soft voice whispered, I love thee. Oh, who other than I can tell how I love thee? And then a grip stronger than that gentle hand seized me by the skirt of my coat and dragged me away slowly but surely, away through the darkness, through the gloom, out into the silent streets, ever away until at last that soft voice, choking with a sob, ceased its pleading and gasped, Farewell, oh farewell, I dare go no further. And so Bulger, in his wisdom, led me on and ever on out of the city of the Minkaminkies, out upon the marble highway. And I think the key phrase in there, the key section in there, is what the ruby drop of blood really is. So, shucks, where was it? If I can't find it in a second, don't worry, I'll go on. Oh, yes. 1,000 times no, it is a tiny blemish of reddish hue, a drop of princely blood from the upper world, which I inhabit, and this drop in all these countless centuries has coursed through the veins of 1,000 kings, and still kept its roseate glow, still remembered the glorious sunshine which called it into being. So it's like she had a bit of the upper world in her heart, and royal blood, I would think, is what he's saying. Okay, so chapter 14. Let us just continue, shall we? I shall pause for a sip of wine. Alrighty then. Chapter 14. Bulger and I turn our backs on the fair domain of Queen Crystallina, nature's wonderful speaking tube. Crystallina's attempt to turn us back, how I kept Bulger from yielding, some incidents of our journey along the marble highway, and how we came to the glorious gateway of solid silver. Silver. I think silver is going to play a huge role in the economy of the future. So, in case you're wondering, I'm reading this on December 20th, 2020. 12/20/2020. Me, the sorrowing Sebastian, loaded... Sebastian. So I just have to say, I don't remember. Like, this might be a Mandela effect because my son's name is Sebastian. And if his name is Sebastian, I certainly would have made note of that. So it just gets weirder and weirder. Me, the sorrowing Sebastian, loaded with as heavy a heart as ever a mortal of my size had borne away with him, did the wise Bulger lead along the broad and silent highway farther and yet farther from the city of the Minkaminkies, until at last the music of the fountains pattering in their crystalline basins died away in the distance and the darkness far behind me. I felt that my wise little brother was right, and so I followed on after, with not a sigh or a syllable to stay him. But he halted at last, and as I felt about me, I discovered that I was standing beside one of the richly carved seats that one so often meets along the marble highway. I was quite as foot-weary as I was heart-heavy, and reaching out, I touched the spring which I knew would transform the seat into a bed, and clambering upon it with my wise Bulger nestled beside me, I soon fell into a deep and refreshing sleep. When I awoke and sitting up, I looked back toward Queen Crystallina's capital. I could see the river of light pouring down its flood of white rays far away in the distance. but only a faint reflection came out to where we had passed the night. And then I knew that my faithful companion had led me to the very uttermost limit of the Minkamankie's domain before he had halted. Yes, sure enough, for as I raised my eyes, there towering above the bed stood the slender crystal column which marked the end of Goggleland, and upon its face I read the extract from a royal decree forbidding a Mikaminkie to overstep his limit under pain of incurring the Queen's most serious displeasure. Before me was darkness and uncertainty. Behind me lay the fair kingdom of the transparent folk, yet in sight, lighted up like a long line of happy homes in which the fires were blazing bright and warm on the hearthstones. Did I turn back? Did I hesitate? No. I could see a pair of speaking eyes fixed upon me and could hear a low whine of impatience coaxing me along. I think that's Bulger, his dog. Stooping down, I fastened a bit of silken cord taken from the bed to Bulger's collar and bade him to lead the way. It was a long while before the light of Queen Crystallina's city faded away entirely, and even when it ceased to be of any service in making known to me the grandeur and beauty of the vast underground passage, I could still see it glitter like a silver star away behind me. But it disappeared at last, and then I felt that I had parted forever with the dear little princess with the speck in her heart. And I just want to pause and say, I think that's really significant, that what he did is he unseated the usurper of the throne and seated the proper person in the throne who, by their perception and belief system, had some kind of liability, a speck in her heart, which actually turned out to be royal blood. I don't know how to parse that out, but that's the theme from the last chapter. And I think that's really significant, that it's our humanness that makes us royal. Just think about that for a second. That which we have been told is a flaw is what qualifies us to sit on the throne of our own sovereignty. And maybe blood is really significant here, our very own lifeblood. Bulger didn't seem to have the slightest difficulty in keeping in the center of the marble highway and never allowed the leading string to slack up for a moment. However, it was by no means a tramp through utter darkness, for the lizards of which I have already spoken, aroused by the sound of my footfall, snapped their tails and lighted up their tiny flash torches in eager attempts to discover whence the noise proceeded and what sort of being it was that had invaded their silent domains. We had covered possibly 2 leagues when suddenly a low and mysterious voice, as soft and gentle as if it had dropped from the clear starry heavens of my own beautiful world, reached my ear. "Sebastian, Sebastian," it murmured. Before I could stop to think, I uttered a cry of wonder, and the noise of my voice seemed to awaken 10,000 of the tiny living flashlights inhabiting the cracks and crevices of the vast arched corridor, flooding it for a moment or so with a soft and roseate radiance. Yes, it's dinner time. "Sebastian, Sebastian," again murmured the mellow and echo-like voice coming from the very walls of the rock beside me. Hastily drawing near to the spot whence the words seemed to come, I laid my ear against the smooth face of the rock. Again the same soft sighing voice pronounced my name so clearly and so close beside me that I reached out to grasp Crystallina's hand, for hers was the voice, and the same low, sweet voice that had told me out of her sorrow in the spectral garden, but there was no one there. In reaching out, however, I had passed my left hand along the face of the wall, and it had marked the presence of a round, smoothed opening in its rock face, an opening about the size of a rainwater pipe in the upper world. Instantly it flashed upon my mind that though some whim of nature, this opening extended for leagues back toward the city of the Mikaminkies through the miles of solid rock, and opened in the very throne room of the Princess Crystallina. Yes, I was right. After a moment or so, again the same low, sweet voice came through the speaking tube of nature's own making and fell upon my eager ear. So there's a tube that goes from the princess's chambers all the way to this little opening in the rock. I waited until it had ceased, and setting my mouth in front of the opening, I murmured in strong but gentle tones, "Farewell, dear Princess Crystallina. Bulger and the little Baron both bid thee a long farewell." And then raising Bulger in my arms, I bade him to weep for his royal, whom he would never see again, his royal friend. He gave a long, low, piteous cry, half whine, half howl, and then I listened for Crystallina's voice. It was not long in coming. Farewell thee, dear Bulger, farewell, dear Sebastian. Crystallina will never forget you until her poor heart with the speck in it runs down and the crystal throne knows her no more. Poor Bulger! It now became my turn to tear him from this spot, for Crystallina's voice, sounding thus unexpectedly in his ears, had aroused all the deep affection which he had so ruthlessly smothered in order to bring his little master to his senses and free him from the charm of Crystallina's grace and beauty. But in vain. All my strength, all my entreaties were powerless to move him from the place. Evidently, Crystallina had heard me pleading with Bulger and had imagined that now I would never ever and stand irresolute. And had imagined that now I would ever and stand irresolute. Heed dear Bulger's prayer, O beloved, she pleaded, and turn back to thy disconsolate Crystallina, whom thou madest so happy for a brief moment. Turn back, oh, turn back. Bulger now began to whine and cry most piteously. I felt that something must be done at once, or the most direful consequences might ensue, that Bulger, crazed by the sweet tones of Crystallina's voice, might break away from me and dart away in mad race back to the city of the Micamenkes, back to the fair young queen of the crystal throne. It became necessary for me to resort to trick and artifice to save my dear little brother from his own loving heart. Drawing his head against my body and covering his eyes with my left arm, I quickly unloosened my neckerchief and, thrusting it into his wonderful speaking tube, closed it effectively. Yes, neckerchief is a word. And thus I saved my faithful Bulger from himself, and thus I closed his ears to the muse of Crystallina's voice. But it was not until after a good hour's waiting that he could bring himself to believe that his beloved friend would speak no more. After several hours more of journeying along the marble highway, a speck of light caught my eye far on ahead, and I redoubled my pace and reached it quickly. I was soon rewarded for my trouble by entering a wonderful chamber, circular in form with a domed roof. In the center of this fair temple of the underground world sprang a glorious fountain with a mighty rush of waters, which brought with them such a phosphorescence that this vast round chamber was lighted up with a pale yellow light in which the countless crystals of the roof and sides sparkled magnificently. Here we passed the night, or what I called the night, refreshing ourselves with the food which I had brought from the kingdom of the Micamenkes, and drinking and bathing in the wonderful fountain which leapt into the air with a rush and a whir, and filled it with a strange and fitful radiance. That's beautiful. Filled it with a strange and fitful radiance. Upon awakening, both Bulger and I felt greatly refreshed, both in body and mind, and we made haste to seek out the lofty portal opening upon the marble highway, and were soon trudging along it again. Hour after hour, we kept on our feet, for something told me that we would not be far away from the confines of some other domain of this world within a world, and this inward prompting of mine proved to be correct, for Bulger suddenly gave a joyful bark and began to caper about, as much as to say, "Yes, Max? O little master, if thou hadst my keen scent, thou wouldst know that we are drawing near to human habitations of some kind." Sure enough, in a few moments a faint light came creeping in beneath the mighty arches of the broad corridor, and every instant it gathered in strength until now I could see clearly about me, and then all of a sudden I caught sight of the source of this shy and unsteady light. There in front of me towered two gigantic candelabra of carved and chased and polished silver, both crowned with 100 lights, one on each side of the marble highway, not the dull soft flames of oil or wax, but the white tongues of fire produced by ignited gas escaping from the chemist's retort. It was marvelous. It was magnificent, and I stood looking up at these great clusters of tongues of flame, spellbound by the glorious illumination, thus set in silent majesty at this gateway to some city of the underworld. Bulger's warning growl brought me to myself, but I must end this chapter here, dear friends, and halt to collect my thoughts before I proceed to tell you what I saw after passing this glorious gateway illumined by these two gigantic candelabra of solid silver. And in the next video, we shall proceed to chapter 15, but not at this time because my dog is very, very hungry. Thank you. Thank you.